Picture this for a second. You're staring across this scorching desert valley, right? And you are looking at an imperial army of 100,000 heavily armored Roman soldiers.
Right.
And then you look to your left, you look to your right, and you realize you only brought 300 men with you.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
I mean, that is just the level of absolute unbending conviction that we are unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks. Yeah, today we are looking at a YouTube documentary. It's titled The Rise of Islam, a historical documentary. And our goal here for you listening is to really examine this completely unprecedented historical anomaly. We're tracing the timeline exactly as this source presents it to see how, a single individual's ideology in the Arabian desert somehow transformed into a global superpower within a single lifetime.
Right, and just to set some quick ground rules before we really get into it, we are taking a strictly analytical approach here. With deeply historical and religiously significant material like this, our objective is purely to analyze the narrative, the mechanisms, and the events exactly as the source video presents them. So no taking sides, no endorsing viewpoints, just a really thorough exploration of how this documentary constructs this incredible timeline.
Yeah, and to really understand the magnitude of that timeline, you kind of have to understand the starting point.
Right.
So the documentary paints 6th century Arabia, specifically the year 570 CE, as a society pretty much devoid of humanity. I mean, the narrative details rampant, brutal slavery, the horrifying practice of burying infant girls alive, and this massive idol worship centered right around the Kaaba in Mecca. At the exact same time, there are local Jewish communities who are anticipating a prophet named Ahmad based on biblical prophecies.
But, it's just this chaotic, lawless, dystopian Wild West. It is highly structured around money.
Very much so.
Mecca wasn't some random desert town, right? It was essentially a ruthless corporate monopoly. The city's elite derived all their wealth and political power directly from the religious pilgrimage to those idols.
Yeah, that economic reality is super crucial. So, into this environment, the Prophet Muhammad is born, and narrative immediately introduces these symbolic miracles.
Right, I remember that part.
Like the source describes idols in the Kaaba just spontaneously breaking on their own, and a Zoroastrian temple fire in Persia that had literally burned continuously for thousands of years just suddenly extinguishes.
Oh.
Yeah, the universe itself is depicted as signaling the end of the old order. But, his rise doesn't actually begin with those miracles. It begins with his character.
Yeah, the documentary really emphasizes his absolute honesty. Long before he does any preaching, he builds a reputation that's so solid that the most powerful people in Mecca trust him with their personal wealth. And that honesty leads to a job managing caravans for a highly respected businesswoman named Khadija, who he eventually marries. And it actually isn't until he's 40 years old, seeking isolation in a cave, that the source identifies him receiving his first revelation.
Right, and Khadija and his young cousin Ali are the very first to believe him.
But hold on, if you look at this from a social dynamics perspective, it doesn't quite add up to me initially.
How so?
Well, if he was universally respected, right, to the point of acting as the city's unofficial bank vault, why did Mecca's power brokers, these wealthy elites like Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan, turn into his fiercest, most violent enemies the exact second he started preaching monotheism?
Well, because his message wasn't just a spiritual alternative, it was a direct threat to that exact corporate monopoly you mentioned earlier.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, by preaching that there is only one God and really emphasizing social equality, he was effectively telling the Meccan elite that their entire economic engine, that idol pilgrimage, was totally invalid. He wasn't just challenging their faith, he was dismantling their wealth and their whole social hierarchy.
So the pushback isn't just a theological debate. It's a desperate attempt to protect their bottom line.
Exactly.
And that leads to this really severe systemic campaign of persecution against anyone who accepts Islam, which kind of culminates around 619 CE in what the narrative calls the Year of Sorrow.
Yeah, it's a brutal year.
He loses his two main shields, his uncle Abu Talib, who provided his physical tribal protection, and his wife Khadija, who was his emotional and financial support.
And the moment that physical protection is gone, the Meccan elite sees the opportunity to basically coordinate an assassination plot surrounding his house with the intention of killing him in his sleep.
But this is where the timeline plays out, literally like a heist movie.
Oh, definitely.
They burst in, but he isn't there. His cousin Ali is sleeping in his bed as a decoy. And what really fascinates me here is why Ali is actually there. The video notes that Ali stayed behind to return belongings that the assassins had left with the Prophet for safekeeping.
I mean, think about the staggering psychological contradiction there. They are literally standing outside his door to murder him, yet they still trust him as the absolute safest place in the city to keep their money.
It's insane. So he and his close companion Abu Bakr, they escaped the house, hiding in the cave of Thar for 3 days before migrating to the city of Medina.
Right, the famous Hijrat.
Yeah. Now, I have to point out to you listening, the totally bizarre chain of events that makes Medina a safe haven. The documentary notes that the local Medinin tribes, the Abbas and Khazraj, invited him precisely because they had been hearing prophecies of a coming prophet from the local Jewish tribes.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's this cross-cultural game of historical telephone that literally ends up saving his life.
It really is. And pay attention to what happens the moment he arrives in Medina.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't treat it as just a place to hide. He immediately drafts a mutual defense pact with those Jewish tribes.
Oh, wow. Straight to business.
Exactly. In a matter of days, the narrative shows him pivoting from a persecuted preacher fleeing for his life to a statesman securing a serious geopolitical alliance.
Well, he had to pivot quickly, right? Because surviving that assassination meant war was inevitable at this point.
Absolutely.
The Meccans confiscated all the property the Muslims had left behind in Mecca. So to reclaim those losses, the Prophet plans to intercept a wealthy Meccan caravan led by Abu Sufyan. But according to the source, he's presented with a divine choice. Take the rich caravan or face a fully armed Meccan army marching their way.
And this sets up the Battle of Badr. The disparity in forces presented in the video is legendary. You have 313 Muslims facing an army of 1,000 Meccans led by Abu Jahl.
Let's pause on the numbers for a second, because the source emphasizes they only had 8 swords and 2 horses among the 313 of them.
Yeah.
8 swords. I mean, I struggle to understand the logic here. If you're a new community, barely surviving, why on earth would you choose to fight 1,000 heavily armed soldiers instead of just grabbing the caravan and running?
Because Badr wasn't about loot. It was a fight for sheer legitimacy.
Okay.
If they take the caravan and run, they just remain in the eyes of Arabia as a nuisance, like a band of scavengers. By choosing to face the army and actually winning against impossible odds, which the narrative states they did, aided by angels, they forced the entire peninsula to take them seriously as a formidable political and military power.
Yeah, and the source highlights these incredibly dramatic pre-battle duels.
Oh, yeah.
You have Muslim fighters like Hamza, Ubaidah, and Ali stepping up and just dismantling the Meccan champions, including this fierce warrior named Utbah. Even Abu Jahl himself falls in the battle. It is an overwhelming underdog victory.
It really is.
But, a victory that humiliating guarantees a massive retaliation.
Exactly. The Meccans couldn't survive the economic and reputational embarrassment of Badr. They had to strike back just to save their empire. And this leads to the Battle of Uhud, where the narrative shifts to a pretty profound lesson on the dangers of greed and lack of discipline. So Abu Sufyan returns with 3,000 men, and he brings along this highly skilled tactician named Khalid bin Walid. The Muslims start with 1,000 men, but 300 of them, led by Abdullah ibn Ubay, just abandon the army right before the battle.
And I want to clarify a specific term used here for you listening. The documentary refers to this group as hypocrites.
Yeah, the Munafiqun.
Right. In this political context, they weren't just people who said one thing and did another. They were a specific fifth column faction. They outwardly claimed loyalty to the state of Medina, but internally they were actively plotting against it. So losing 300 of them right before a battle, that is a massive act of coordinated treason.
Definitely. Leaving only 700 Muslims. Yet they initially have a really strong tactical advantage. The Prophet places 50 archers on a hill with strict orders to hold their position no matter what happens on the ground.
Right, the high ground.
But as the Meccans begin to retreat, 35 of those archers break discipline. They abandon the hill to go gather the spoils of war left behind.
And Khalid bin Walid, being the tactician he is, immediately exploits that error. He flanks them from behind, and the whole battle just turns into a disaster.
Yeah.
The Muslims suffer heavy losses, the Prophet's uncle Hamza is martyred, the Prophet himself is injured, and panic just sets in. There's even a rumor that he died.
Yeah, it's a brutal mechanism for teaching the community that material greed will literally destroy them.
Wow.
And that harsh lesson at Uhud forces a complete evolution in how they fight, because the threat just keeps escalating. Abu Sufyan returns to Medina again, but this time with a massive coalition of 10,000 men.
And the Muslims only have, 3,000?
Exactly. Going toe-to-toe in an open field would be military suicide at this point.
So here is where we see this fascinating tactical paradigm shift. A companion named Salman the Persian introduces a strategy entirely foreign to Arabian warfare. He's just digging a massive trench around the exposed perimeters of Medina. It's essentially open source military tech. The Arabian combat model relied heavily on the shock and awe of a cavalry charge. Salman takes an engineering concept from the Persian Empire to completely neutralize the enemy's primary asset, which is their horses.
And the excavation was grueling. The documentary describes a moment where a massive, totally unbreakable boulder blocks their path in the trench. The prophet strikes it 3 times, shattering it, and with each strike, he prophesies the ultimate fall of the Roman, Persian, and Yemeni empires.
I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. You are starving, digging a ditch in the dirt, surrounded by 10,000 enemy troops, and your leader is predicting the conquest of global superpowers.
It's an unbelievable level of conviction.
And the trench actually works. The Meccan cavalry is stalled. We get the cinematic scene where a giant warrior, Amir bin Abd al-Wud, manages to jump the trench. A 27-year-old Ali steps up, offers some conditions to walk away peacefully, and when he refuses, Ali defeats him in a single strike.
It's a huge moment.
But wait, a ditch only stops a frontal assault, right? A siege of 10,000 men can just wait you out until you literally starve to death. How do they actually break the siege?
Well, the physical trench was only half the defense. The threat was actually twofold. While the army is outside, the Jewish tribes inside Medina break their defense pact and start conspiring with the Meccans.
Oh no.
Yeah, the Muslims are trapped between an army and an internal revolt. They survive this through pure psychological warfare, executed by a man named Nuaym bin Masud.
Let's look at how he does this because it's brilliant.
It really is. So Nuaym is a secret convert to Islam. He goes to the Jewish tribes and convinces them that the Meccans might just abandon the siege, leaving them to face the Muslims all alone. So he advises them to demand Meccan leaders as hostages for collateral.
Okay.
Then he goes straight to the Meccans and tells them the Jewish tribes have betrayed them and are going to ask for hostages to hand over to the Muslims.
It is an absolute masterclass in sowing doubt. He weaponizes their lack of trust completely against them. So when the Jewish tribes actually ask for the collateral, the Meccans think the trap is sprung. The entire 10,000 man alliance just implodes from paranoia.
Exactly. That psychological break, combined with a massive windstorm that the source says basically ravaged the Meccan camp, completely ends the siege.
Wow.
Afterward, the internal traitors in Medina are judged. And the documentary notes a fascinating detail here. They aren't judged by Islamic law. They are judged by a man named Sa'd bin Mu'adh, who hands down a sentence based strictly on the laws of their own Torah.
That's incredible. So having survived the ultimate physical attempt to wipe them out, the narrative shifts entirely from battlefield survival to high-level diplomacy. The prophet marches toward Mecca with 1,500 men, not armed for war, but dressed to perform the Umrah pilgrimage.
And the Meccans intercept, completely unwilling to let them enter. They send an envoy, Urwa bin Masud, to basically assess the Muslims. And he returns to Mecca deeply unsettled. He reports back that he has seen kings and emperors, but he has never, ever witnessed the profound psychological unity of the Muslims. He tells them they won't even let a drop of the water he washes with hit the ground.
That display of intense devotion just terrifies the Meccan leadership into negotiating, which results in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It's a 10-year peace agreement, but on paper, the terms look ridiculously one-sided against the Muslims.
Yeah, very unfair.
If a Meccan defects to Medina, the Muslims are legally bound to extradite him. But if a Muslim defects to Mecca, the Meccans get to keep him. The Muslim companions are furious about this. They feel totally humiliated.
Right.
But it looks like what you might call a poison pill contract, but it actually forces the enemy to defeat themselves. Because a Muslim named Abu Basir escapes Mecca, and due to the treaty, the Prophet is legally forced to turn him away from Medina at the jurisdiction of Medina, and they begin intercepting Mecca caravans. They strangle Mecca's economy so badly with the treaty.
It's amazing.
Do you think he knew that loophole would present itself, or is this just incredible adaptability on the fly?
Well, the narrative presents it as profound strategic foresight. By adhering strictly to an unfair law, he allowed the actual consequences of that law to dismantle the enemy's economy. What the treaty really bought the Muslims was the most valuable resource in any conflict time.
Right.
By securing their southern border with Mecca, they totally avoided a two-front war, which allowed them to focus on northern threats.
Which culminates in the Battle of Khaybar, this massive, heavily fortified stronghold in the north. Khaybar delivers another one of these highly cinematic moments.
Oh, definitely.
The fortress is seemingly impenetrable. The source describes the Prophet curing Ali's painful eyes with his saliva and handing him the battle standard. Ali marches right up to the fortress, declares his mother named him Hader, meaning lion, dispatches the enemy's greatest warrior, Marhab, and then physically tears a 900-kilo iron door completely off its hinges.
Incredible. And with the regional Arabian threats largely subdued at this point, the geopolitical scope widens dramatically. The Muslims are now bumping up against the borders of the Roman Empire.
Wow.
This leads to the Battle of Muta. An envoy is killed by the Romans, and 3,000 Muslims march out to face a staggering 100,000 Roman soldiers.
And it goes poorly at first, right? They lose 3 consecutive commanders, Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah, one right after the other. But then Khalid bin Walid, the same tactician who defeated them back at Uhud, who is actually now converted to Islam, takes charge. And the video credits him with using a tactical retreat to save the army.
Right.
But how do you retreat from an army of 100,000 without them just running you down from behind?
He uses the psychology of the battlefield. The narrative indicates he rearranged his entire army under the cover of darkness. He swapped the right flank with the left and the front lines with the rear.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. When the sun came up, the Romans saw familiar faces and completely new banners. Khalid created the illusion that massive Muslim reinforcements had arrived overnight. The Romans hesitated, and in that brief window of confusion, he safely withdrew his men.
That is brilliant. Meanwhile, back south, the Meccan allies break the peace treaty. So the Prophet marches on Mecca, this time with an overwhelming force of 10,000 men. Now, after years of torture, assassination attempt, and war, you would expect an absolute bloodbath.
Sure.
Instead, the documentary describes a totally bloodless surrender. He grants a general amnesty to the city. Even Abu Sufyan, the architect of so much of their suffering, converts. It's this extraordinary act of grace. But as we see immediately at the Battle of Hunain, power brings a new kind of danger.
Right, Hunain serves as the ideological counterweight to Badr. At Badr, 313 men relied entirely on their conviction. At Hunain, the Muslims have a massive army of 12,000 men, and the narrative shows them becoming arrogant. They start relying just on their numbers.
The irony there is palpable. You want to talk about irony? When they had 8 swords, they stood their ground fearlessly against 1,000. Now, with 12,000 heavily armed troops, they get ambushed by local tribes and actually panic. They break ranks and flee.
Yeah.
The source says the Prophet had to stand his ground, essentially throwing a handful of dust toward the enemy to blind them, which eventually rallied his troops and turned the tide. It's a stark demonstration that numbers absolutely do not equal morale.
Exactly. Which brings us full circle to the image we started with, the expedition of Tobuk. The Roman Empire is massing 100,000 troops at the northern border. The Prophet calls for an army to march out and meet them. But he does this during the blistering heat of the desert summer, right during the harvest season.
And this is the incredible claim from the source we opened with. Against 100,000 Romans, only 300 Muslims march out. Yeah.
Just 300 men walking into a furnace, leaving their crops to rot, to face an imperial superpower. And the documentary says the Romans were so unsettled by this absolute lack of fear that they retreated without engaging.
Because Tobruk wasn't really about fighting the Romans. It was a filtration mechanism. By setting the conditions so impossibly hard, it separated the truly committed from the internal political hypocrites right before the Prophet's passing. It was the ultimate stress test.
And those internal threats were very real.